If you feel that life has left you without strength, without hope, and that there is no way out, pay attention to this story. It might change everything. It was a gray morning in the small town of San Antonio, where the days seemed to repeat themselves like an endless cycle of work and silence. On the outskirts, on a lonely hill, lived a donkey named Mateo. His tired eyes reflected the weight of the years and the hard work he had endured to help his owner, Don Salvador, an old farmer who depended on Mateo to plow the fields and transport heavy loads. Mateo was not young, and his body was no longer as strong as it was in his days of youth. His bones creaked with each step, and his gray coat, once bright, now looked opaque and worn. However, what hurt most was not the passage of time, but the loneliness that had come to his life. Don Salvador had died weeks ago, the victim of a sudden illness, and since then Mateo had been left alone, wandering the fields without a purpose. The new owners of the farm did not pay attention to him. For them, Mateo was just a nuisance, an old animal that no longer had any value. One morning, when the sun was just beginning to appear between the clouds, Mateo heard a conversation that would change his life forever. The new owners of the farm had decided to get rid of him. "That donkey is no longer of any use to us," said one of the men with coldness. "We cannot spend on his food. Tomorrow we take him to the ravine and leave him there." Matthew, although a donkey, understood more than humans believed. His heart was filled with anguish. He knew what it meant to be taken to the ravine. It was the place where old or sick animals were abandoned to their fate, condemned to die alone. That night, under the stars, Mateo curled up on the cold ground of the farm. Fear and sadness invaded him, but beyond all he felt something he had not experienced in a long time: despair. Tears rolled down his face, mixing with the earth under his feet. The world had turned its back on him, and now he was facing his end without being able to do anything about it. The next morning, when the men arrived to take him to the ravine, Mateo did not resist. Resistance. He walked with his head down, resigned to his fate. When he arrived, the men pushed him carelessly to the edge of the ravine. Mateo stumbled and fell, rolling down the slope until his body was trapped between some rocks. The pain was unbearable. He felt as if every bone in his body had broken. His forces abandoned him and his eyes began to close slowly. The cold of loneliness was the only thing that enveloped him at that moment. But on the edge of unconsciousness, something inside him began to wake up. A small spark of life, a silent voice that told him that it was not yet his time. "Do not give up," he seemed to whisper. "This is not the end." Mateo, with the little breath he had left, clung to that idea. He did not know how, but something inside him told him that he had to resist, and so, in the abyss of his suffering, began the true struggle of Mateo. Mateo lay at the bottom of the ravine, immobile, his body aching and covered in dust. Every breath was an effort, and the pain that consumed him seemed impossible to bear. The thoughts of abandonment and despair enveloped him, but in the depths of his heart, that little spark was still lit. An internal voice, weak but persistent, reminded him that he was not destined to die there, not in that way. The day passed slowly, slowly. The scorching sun that bathed the ravine in the morning now began to hide behind the mountains, and the night fell with its mantle of cold. Mateo tried to move, but the pain pierced him like 1,000 needles. However, when he remembered the cruel words of the men who had led him there, a mixture of sadness and rage began to shake in his chest. How was it possible that, after a whole life of service, they would have thrown him as if he were worth nothing? As the full moon illuminated the ravine, Mateo began to reflect on his life. He remembered his youth when he ran freely through the fields, taking Don Salvador from one place to another with pride. The old farmer had always treated him with respect and affection. Don Salvador used to tell him that every being in this world had a purpose, and that even in the darkest moments, there was always a reason to move on. But now, without his friend, Mateo felt empty, as if his purpose had been lost with the death of the old man. However, that night something changed. As the stars twinkled in the sky, a sound broke the silence. A little fox with red and shiny fur cautiously approached Mateo. His curious eyes observed him from a safe distance. "What are you doing here?" asked the fox with a soft but firm voice. Mateo, surprised by the presence of the little animal, could barely respond. "They abandoned me," he said with a thread of voice. "I am no longer useful for anything." The fox sat down next to him. "Matteo." There was something in Matteo's gaze that caused him a deep sadness. "We all have courage, even when we think we don't have it," said the fox, his words resonating in Matteo's heart. "The world puts us to the test of ways that we do not always understand, but it is not about what the world believes in you, but what you believe in yourself." Matteo felt a knot in his throat. No one had spoken to him like that since the death of Don Salvador. Was what the fox said true? Could he still have courage, even if everything in his life indicated otherwise? "I don't know if I can do it," Matteo replied, feeling the weight of his doubts. "I'm old, broken. I don't know if I have the strength to go on." The fox, with a surprising calm, got up and took a step towards him. "The true strength is not in the body but in the heart. He has survived until now. That is already a sign of strength. If you can get up, even if it's a little, then you can still fight." The words of the fox resonated in the deepest of the being of Matthew. Despite the pain and suffering, there was something inside him that was not willing to give up. Maybe, after all, there was still hope. With great effort, Matthew tried to move a leg. The pain was intense, but not as great as his desire not to die in that place. Slowly it began to incorporate, although each movement seemed to take a piece of life from it. The fox watched it in silence, without intervening, but with a look of approval. "That's it," said the fox softly. "Step by step, friend. The road to liberation is not easy, but it is always possible." Matteo, stumbling, managed to stand up. Despite the wounds, despite the pain, he was standing. Something that seemed impossible. Just a few hours ago, now it felt like a miracle. The donkey looked at the fox with gratitude, but also with a new determination in his eyes. "I don't know how I will do it," admitted Matteo, "but I don't want to die here." The fox smiled slightly, showing his sharp teeth. "That's all you need. The rest will come with time. Remember, the world can turn its back on you, but you will always have the option to move on, to create your own destiny." Still wounded, he began to walk. Step by step, the donkey began his long and painful ascent out of the ravine. He did not know what awaited him, but something was certain: he would not give up. Not that night, not ever again. Matteo continued to advance with slow and heavy steps. The darkness of the night enveloped him, and the cold began to settle in his bones. But the donkey was no longer the same that had fallen into the ravine that morning. Something inside him had caught fire, a flame of determination that could not let him die. Despite the pain in his legs and the wounds that burned in his body, Matteo knew he had to go on. Every step he took was a reminder that he was still alive, that he still had something to fight for. The road to the top was steep, full of rocks and obstacles that made every move agony. At every step his legs trembled, threatening to fail, but Matteo refused to stop. The echo of the fox's words resounded in his mind. The true strength is not in the body, but in the heart. Matthew thought of Don Salvador, in the years he had spent working with him. He remembered how the old man always caressed him behind his ears when they finished a long day of work, and how, despite the harsh winters and droughts that sometimes ravaged the crops, Don Salvador always kept hope. "There is always a way," the old man used to say. And now those words seemed to come to life inside Matteo, but the climb was not easy. At one point, the donkey stumbled over a loose rock and fell to the side, his body hitting the ground with a painful moan. The impact was so strong that for a second, he thought he could not get up again. He felt his heart accelerate and despair assault him again. Was this what awaited him? Fall and never be able to get up again? Matthew closed his eyes, trying to calm down, trying to find strength within himself. However, that night something changed. As the stars twinkled in the sky, a sound broke the silence. A little fox with red and shiny fur cautiously approached Matteo. His curious eyes observed him from a safe distance. "Then you can still fight." With a monumental effort, Matteo pushed his body against the ground and began to get up. Each fiber of his being screamed for pain, but the spark within him was still alive, stronger than ever. He managed to stand up, wobbling but firm. The donkey breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the cold air of the night. He could not give up, not now. With renewed determination, Matteo followed his way to the top of the ravine. The ascent was slow, almost unbearable, but each step brought him closer to freedom. The weight of his wounds and the fatigue he carried on his back seemed to become lighter the more he advanced, as if with each step he left behind a part of the pain that had kept him trapped. Emily Bainin. The stars shone strongly in the sky, guiding his way like small lights of hope. The moon, tall and majestic, illuminated the path in front of him, giving him the encouragement he needed not to stop. Matthew knew he was not alone. There was something bigger that accompanied him, something that pushed him to move on. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Matteo arrived at the edge of the ravine. The summit was in front of him, just a few steps away. With a beating heart, he gathered all his strength and took the last steps towards freedom. When he reached the summit, the donkey stopped, shivering and trembling, but standing. He had made it. He had come out of the abyss. He stayed there under the starry sky, observing the landscape that spread before him. Everything seemed different from that height. The fields, the wind, the mountains in the distance, everything looked clearer, as if with his effort he had gained a new perspective of the world. For a moment, Matteo simply breathed, enjoying that feeling of victory, knowing that he had done something that many would have considered impossible. But the road had not ended. Now that he had left the ravine, he had to decide what to do with his life. Returning to the farm was not an option, not after having been abandoned. He knew that his destiny was elsewhere, but he had no idea where. However, something inside him told him that as long as he kept his hope and determination, he would find his way. Before leaving, Matteo looked up at the sky. In a gesture of silent gratitude, he closed his eyes for a moment. He knew that there was something bigger that had helped him get up, and although he could not name it, he felt a deep connection to it. With his eyes set on the horizon, Matteo began to walk. He had overcome the ravine, but now the real adventure was about to begin. The cold of the night began to set in when Matteo set off, moving away from the ravine that had almost become his grave. Each step he took filled him with a mixture of fatigue and hope. The wounds in his body still hurt, but the simple fact of being in motion reminded him that he had survived, that he was still fighting. In the distance, the first lights of dawn began to shine on the horizon, dyeing the sky with soft tones of orange and pink. Matteo walked without a fixed course, with his mind lost in his thoughts. For years, his life had been working for Don Salvador, a man who took care of him as if he were his equal. Now, without him, Matteo felt that he had lost his purpose. The reality was hard, and the uncertainty about what he would do next weighed on his heart. Where was an old and wounded donkey going when he no longer had a place to call home? The words of the fox still resonated in his head. We all have courage, even when we think we don't. Matteo a donkey. Matteo stopped for a moment, indecisive. During his time with Don Salvador, he had learned to read human emotions, and he could see that the child was suffering. Matteo doubted. It was not common for a donkey to approach humans on its own, but something in the child reminded him of his own despair, that feeling of having been abandoned by the world. Without thinking more, Matteo slowly moved towards him. The child, when he felt his presence, raised his gaze. His eyes were full of tears, and his face reflected a pain that did not seem to correspond to someone his age. However, when he saw the donkey, his expression changed from surprise to curiosity. "What are you doing here, donkey?" the child asked in a soft voice, as if he did not expect an answer. Matteo, of course, could not speak, but he got a little closer, tilting his head as if trying to console the little one. The child extended his hand, shy at first, but then more confident, and gently caressed Matteo's forehead. "Matteo, you are hurt," he said, noting the scars and the dirty fur of the donkey. "Does it hurt you?" Matteo could not answer, but the simple contact of the child seemed to alleviate some of his own pain. He stayed there next to him, feeling an inexplicable connection with that little human being. For some reason, Matteo did not feel alone in the presence of the child. "My name is Thomas," said the child after a long silence. "My father also had a donkey, but he took it when he left home and never returned." The child's words were simple, but the pain behind them was deep. Matthew could feel it. Thomas had been abandoned. Like him. Maybe that's why fate had brought them together at that moment, in that place. The two remained silent for a while, as if they understood that they did not need words to share their pain. The wind blew gently between the trees, and the sound of the stream created a quiet melody that accompanied the moment. "I don't know what I'm going to do now," Thomas continued. "My mom is very sad, and I can't do anything to help her. I feel like I'm a burden to her." The words of the child were like an echo of Mateo's thoughts. The donkey had felt the same. A feeling of uselessness, of not having value in a world that no longer needed it. However, being there next to Thomas made him realize something important. His value was not in what he could do physically, but in what he could offer with his presence. Sometimes the simple fact of being there for someone was enough. Mateo, without thinking, leaned towards Tomas, gently pushing his head against the child's shoulder in a gesture of support. Tomas hugged him, whispering in silence. The donkey did not move, allowing the child to find comfort in it. After a while, Tomas dried his tears and stood up. "Donkey," he said with a small smile, the first he had shown in a long time. "I don't know if you understand me, but I think we meet for a reason." Mateo looked at him with his big dark eyes, as if he were answering him without words. They were both broken, but together they seemed to find a little peace. The child again caressed Mateo's forehead and then pointed to a small house in the distance. "I live there with my mom," Thomas explained. "Would you like to come with me? We don't have much, but I promise I'll take care of you." Mateo did not know what the future had in store for him, but at that moment, Thomas' offer was more than enough. The road to the little house of Thomas was silent, but not uncomfortable. Matthew walked with the child with a slow but constant step, still feeling the pain in his legs, but stronger thanks to the company. Thomas, for his part, seemed to find comfort in the simple presence of the donkey. Matthew, for his part, seemed to find comfort in the simple presence of the donkey. The road to the little house of Thomas was silent, but not uncomfortable. Matthew walked with the child with a slow but constant step, still feeling the pain in his legs, but stronger thanks to the company. As if Mateo had discovered a companion in his sadness. Every now and then the child looked at him, smirking a little smile that showed that, although the pain was still there, he no longer felt so alone. When they finally arrived at the house, Mateo could see that Tomas' home and his mother were nothing more than a humble wooden cabin, surrounded by a small garden that barely survived the cold of the night. The walls of the house seemed to have seen better days, and the front door swung slightly with the wind, as if it were about to crumble. "It is not much," said Thomas as he opened the door, "but it is what we have." Mateo observed the house with curiosity. Despite his worn-out appearance, there was something in the place that made him feel welcome. Maybe it was the simplicity of the environment, or maybe it was the warmth emanating from Tomas and his way of treating him. Whatever it was, Mateo felt that he had found a refuge, a place where, although nothing was perfect, there was space for him. Mom called Thomas, entering the house with enthusiasm. "Look what I found." A thin woman with dark hair came out of a small kitchen, drying her hands with a cloth. Her eyes were swollen, as if she had cried for hours, and her tired expression revealed the worries that consumed her. However, when she saw Mateo, her gaze softened. "Tomas, where did you get this donkey from?" he asked softly, but with a mixture of surprise and tenderness. "I found it near the stream," the boy explained. "He is hurt and alone, Mom. He has nowhere to go, and I thought we could take care of him." "Do not worry, I will take care of him. I will not ask you to do anything." The woman looked at her son and then at Matthew and sighed deeply. She knew that they could not afford to take care of another being, not with what little they had. But she also understood how important it was for Thomas to have something that would keep him busy, something that would give him hope in the midst of his sadness. "All right, Tomas," she finally said, stroking the boy's hair. "But it will be your responsibility. Make sure you have food and a place to rest." Tomas sat down with enthusiasm and a grateful smile, guiding Mateo to a small shelter behind the house. The place was nothing more than an improvised shelter, but it had enough space for the donkey to lie down and rest after a long day. Mateo went into the cupboard and lay down on the straw that Tomas had scattered on the floor. His body still hurt, and the wounds would take time to heal, but at that moment he felt something that he had not experienced since the death of Don Salvador, a sense of belonging. For the first time in a long time, he did not feel like a burden, like an animal forgotten by the world. Instead, he felt that, in some way, he had become one. He had found a purpose, a reason to move forward. During the following days, Tomas took care of Mateo with dedication. Although the family did not have much, there was always a little food for the donkey, and Tomas made sure to clean his wounds and keep him sheltered during the cold nights. The weight of the loneliness that had been carrying for so long was lightened, and for the first time in a long time, Mateo. The donkey felt that, although the world could be cruel, there was still kindness in it. One afternoon, while Tomas was feeding it, the child sat down next to him and spoke with a sincerity that surprised Mateo. "You know, little donkey, when I found you, I felt like you. I thought my dad had left because I was not enough, because I had no value. But now I realize that it is not like that. You are not useless, and I am not either. Maybe bad things happen, but that does not mean that we cannot move on." The child's words resonated deeply in Mateo. He had also believed that his life had no value, that his time had passed, and that he only had to accept his end. But at that moment when he heard Thomas, he understood something fundamental. The value was not in what we had lost, but in what we could still offer, even in the worst circumstances. The sun was setting on the horizon, and the sky was dyed a soft golden color. Matthew looked at Thomas, and for a moment he knew that both had found something invaluable: hope. The days became weeks, and Matthew began to recover not only his physical strength, but also his spirit. The pain in his body faded slowly, and every day he could walk a little further, exploring the surroundings of the little house of Thomas with greater freedom. His bond with the child grew with each shared moment, and Mateo realized that, in their mutual company, both were healing. Tomas had found in Mateo more than a simple animal. He had found a friend, a silent confidant who listened to him in his most difficult moments. The afternoons used to pass in the small garden behind the house, where Tomas spoke of his feelings, of his fears, of his longing for a father who would not return. The end. Mateo listened to him attentively, feeling that although he could not offer words of consolation, his mere presence was enough. One day, while they were together under the shade of an old oak, Tomas revealed something that he had kept in his heart. "You know, little donkey," he said with a fixed gaze on the horizon, "I always wanted to be brave, like the heroes of the stories that my father told me before he left. But I never felt strong enough." Until now, Mateo raised his head and looked at it carefully. There was a determination in Tomas' face that he had not seen before. The boy, who until recently was consumed by sadness, now seemed to have found a new spark of life. "You taught me something," Tomas continued, gently caressing Mateo's gray coat. "You taught me that no matter how broken you are, you can always move on. I love you, Mateo. If you, a wounded and abandoned donkey, were able to get up and walk again, then I can also face whatever comes." Matthew felt a deep respect for the child. Although he did not know it, Thomas had been his salvation as much as he had been the child's. Together, they had overcome the pain of feeling forgotten by the world, and together they had learned that the true strength was not in the physical, but in the ability to resist and find purpose in the midst of adversity. However, life still had an unexpected challenge in store for them. One afternoon, while Tomas was playing in the garden and Mateo was grazing nearby, a man appeared in the distance, walking with a firm step towards the house. Tomas saw him first, and his expression changed immediately. It was he who whispered to Tomas, whispering in a tone that mixed surprise and fear. Matthew watched the man approach, and although he did not understand why Thomas was so upset, he knew that something important was about to happen. The man, tall and beardless, had a hard expression on his face. When he finally reached the entrance of the house, he stopped and looked around him. Thomas called out in a low voice, "Where is your mother?" The child, without moving from the place, swallowed saliva and responded in a low voice, "It is inside, Dad." The man sighed but did not approach his son. Instead, he directed his attention to Matthew, who was staring at him. The man observed him for a few seconds and then let out a sigh, as if he had seen something he did not expect. "And that donkey?" he asked without much interest. "It's mine," said Thomas. "A little ahead I found him wounded and I took care of him. His name is Mateo." The man took a pause and for the first time looked Thomas in the eye. There was something in his gaze, something that seemed to be battling between pride and regret. However, he said nothing about the donkey. Instead of that, he turned to the door of the house and entered without saying anything. Tomas remained silent, looking towards where his father had disappeared. Mateo, noticing the tension in the air, approached and gently pushed the child with his head, as he had done in his first encounter with Arroyo. Tomas, grateful for the gesture, he stroked the donkey's forehead, but this time his expression was different. There was sadness, yes, but also something else. Hope. That night, Thomas's father and his mother spoke for hours. Matthew, who was resting in the blanket, listened to the murmurs of the conversation, but could not understand the content. However, what he could feel was Thomas's concern, who could not sleep and remained on watch by the window of his room. The man looked at the stars, as if he were looking for answers in the sky. The next morning, Thomas' father approached the blanket where Matthew was. The donkey, alert, raised his head, waiting for any sign of what was to come. The man watched him closely, and to Matthew's surprise, he bent over and caressed his head with a firm but soft hand. "For taking care of my son," said the man in a barely audible whisper. Mateo did not fully understand the words, but he could feel the emotion behind them. Sometimes the simplest acts had the greatest meaning, and that brief moment of gratitude between the man and the donkey marked the beginning of something new. The man left that same day, but this time, Tomas did not see it with the same eyes. He was no longer the broken child due to the absence of his father. He had grown up, but he was still a child. He had found an inner strength that he did not know he had, and now he understood that, although his father may not return, he was no longer the same defenseless child as before. Mateo had also changed. Both donkey and child had learned an invaluable lesson, both inside and outside of him, and that in the end some wounds took longer to heal than others. The days continued, and although life seemed to resume its course, Mateo could feel that something had changed. Tomas, despite the challenges, was stronger. The child had grown not only in body, but also in spirit. The pain of the absence of his father was still present, but he no longer defined it. Tomas had learned to face his fears, and although his heart was still marked by sadness, he had found a way to move on. Mateo, for his part, had also transformed. He had come to the life of Thomas as an old and abandoned donkey, believing that his purpose in life had faded along with the death of Don Salvador. However, the time he had spent with the child had shown him that the value of his existence did not depend on what he had been, but on what he could be. Every day that I shared with Tomas was a reminder that I still had a lot to offer. One afternoon, while they were walking through the field, Tomas started talking about something that had been running through his mind for days. "You know, Mateo," he said while he was walking next to the donkey, "I've been thinking about everything we've been through. At the beginning, when Dad left, I thought the world was coming down on me. I felt that I had nothing, that everything that mattered to me had gone. But you taught me that, even when everything seems lost, we can always find a way to move on." Mateo, as usual, listened in silence, but this time, while the boy was talking, he felt something different in his words. There was a wisdom that was not there when they met. Mateo looked bewilderment, and the boy smiled. "You have also changed, little donkey. At first I thought you were as broken as I am, but little by little I saw that you still had strength in you, that strength that is not seen, but that is there. You taught me that no matter how broken we are, we can always get up, always." As they walked, a soft breeze enveloped them and the sun began to descend on the horizon. It was a moment of peace, one of those rare moments in which everything seemed to be in balance, as if the world gave them a truce to breathe and reflect. Suddenly, Tomas stopped and looked at the donkey with a serious expression. "Mateo, I want to do something important. I want to help others as you helped me." The donkey bowed his head, curious. "Mama told me there's a farm here where they take care of animals that have been abandoned like you. They say they need help, that they don't have enough hands to take care of all the animals, and I thought maybe we could go together. We could help those animals, give them a place where they feel loved, where they don't feel so alone." The words of Thomas surprised Matthew. It was incredible to think how the child, who once had felt lost and without value now, was looking for a way to give hope to others. Tomas had transformed his own pain into something greater, into a mission to do good, to offer what he had received: support, love, and above all the certainty that he was not alone. "What do you say, donkey?" Tomas asked, with a spark of emotion in his eyes. "Are we going to help those animals together?" Mateo, who now walked with more confidence and strength than ever, felt a slight movement in his head. The donkey knew that, although he had begun this journey feeling old and purposeless, he had found a new reason to move on. And he would do it with Thomas. Both, child and donkey, set off on their way to the farm the next day. As they advanced, Mateo could not help but think about everything that had changed since he had fallen into the ravine. The despair that once had consumed him had been replaced by the certainty that the value was not in what you had done in the past, but in what you could still do. They arrived at the farm at dusk. The place was surrounded by green fields and large stables where the sound of various animals could be heard. Some of them, like Mateo, had been abandoned or mistreated, but in that place they had found a refuge. Tomas and Mateo became an inseparable team on the farm. Together they took care of the animals, they offered them love and a new opportunity for life. And in that process, both continued to grow, healing and finding new reasons to move on. They had learned that life always presented challenges, but the true strength lay in how you decided to face them. Each obstacle could be a step towards something bigger. Learn more at www.somethingbetter. As long as you keep the hope and desire to move forward, there will always be a way to go. Time passed quickly on the farm. Mateo and Tomas had perfectly integrated into the rhythm of life of the place, and every day was a new opportunity to learn, help, and heal. Don Alvaro, the manager, was a wise man who had dedicated his life to taking care of animals that, as Mateo, they had been physically and emotionally abandoned or injured. Their patience and kindness inspired all those who came to the farm. "This farm is not only a refuge for animals," Don Alvaro told Tomas one afternoon while supervising the care of the horses. "It is also a place where broken hearts, humans and animals alike, find a space to heal. Here everyone learns that the value is not in what we lose, but in what we can build again." Thomas listened carefully. He had learned a lot since he arrived at the farm, not only about the animals, but also about life itself. Every being that arrived at the place, whether it was a scared dog, an old horse, or even another donkey, brought with it a story of pain. But the most important thing was that everyone found a new opportunity, a space where they could be accepted and valued as they were. Mateo had also found his place on the farm. Despite his wounds and scars, the donkey had become a reassuring presence for the other animals. His experience of overcoming the ravine and despair made him a source of comfort for those who came to the farm in similar situations. The other animals seemed to feel his calm and strength and approached him in search of support. Mateo did not need words to offer comfort. His presence said it all. One afternoon, while Tomas and Mateo were resting under the shade of a tree on the farm, a new visitor arrived at the place. It was a young, thin, and visibly scared potter who had been rescued from a market where he had been mistreated. His eyes reflected a mixture of fear and distrust. Tomas observed him from a distance, with his heart tight when he saw the pain in the eyes of the potter. "It seems that he has gone through a lot," he commented in a low voice, caressing Mateo's back. The donkey, with the wisdom that only the years and experience could grant, Mateo got up slowly and approached the potter. He did it without haste, keeping a respectful distance as if he understood that the young horse needed time to feel safe. The potter observed Mateo cautiously at first, but soon, seeing the calmness of the donkey, he seemed to relax a little. Mateo stayed by his side, motionless, simply offering company. The potter, who had arrived at the farm full of fear and distrust, little by little he lowered his head and accepted the presence of the old donkey. Thomas watched the scene with admiration. There was something deeply moving to see how Matthew, an animal that had once been on the verge of death and abandonment, now offered comfort and support to another who needed to find his own way to healing. "I always knew you had something special, Mateo," whispered Tomas, smiling tenderly. "Not only did you help me, but now you help everyone who comes here." The days on the farm passed with serenity, and although the work was sometimes arduous, Both Matteo and Tomas found satisfaction in each task done. They had come to the farm like two lost souls, but over time they had become a source of hope for others. One afternoon, while Tomas was brushing one of the horses, Don Alvaro approached him with a reflexive expression on his face. "You have done a great job here, boy," he said with a soft smile. "You and Matteo have brought a new energy to the farm. The animals trust you, and it is because they feel the kindness that both carry in their hearts." Thomas, smiled by the praise, smiled shyly. "I only try to help," he replied humbly. "Matthew taught me not to give up, and I want to do the same for others." Don Alvaro assented, understanding the depth of those words. "The world is full of challenges," Thomas said in a more serious tone, "but those who are truly strong are those who, despite the pain, continue on, and not only that, but they find a way to help others on their way. That is what you and Matteo are doing here, and believe me, that is the greatest strength of all." The words of Don Alvaro resonated deeply in the heart of Tomas. While looking at Matteo, who continued to accompany the frightened potter, he understood that his time on the farm had been much more than a process of personal healing. It had been a lesson in life, an opportunity to discover that although life presented them with difficult challenges, the key was always in how they decided to face them. That night, while the sun was setting, Thomas and Matthew sat on the same tree under which they had spent so many afternoons reflecting. The sky was painted with orange and purple tones, and a soft breeze blew over the fields. "You know, Matthew," said Thomas in a low voice, "I have been thinking a lot about what Don Alvaro said today. Perhaps life puts us to the test so that we can be stronger, not only for ourselves, but for others. If we hadn't gone through everything we went through, we would never have arrived here, and we would never have helped others as we are doing now." Matteo, as always, remained silent, but Tomas knew that he understood. Both had learned that life was full of difficulties, but also of opportunities. Each overcome challenge was an opportunity to grow, to become wiser, stronger, and more capable of helping others to do the same. With the starry sky spreading over them, Thomas felt a deep peace in his heart. He knew that whatever happens, as long as Matteo was by his side, they would always find a way to move on, of transforming challenges into opportunities and offering hope to those who need it. The climate on the farm began to change with the arrival of winter. The soft breezes of autumn turned into cold winds that swept the fields, and the nights became longer and colder. Despite the harsh winter that was approaching, life on the farm continued its course. Tomas and Matteo continued their daily routine, taking care of the animals, offering warmth and company to those who needed it most. In the final chapter of Tomas and Matteo's journey, fate challenges them once more during a fierce snowstorm, testing the bond between the boy and his loyal donkey. When a young foal, whom Matteo had previously helped, goes missing amidst the storm, Tomas and Don Alvaro launch a desperate search. With the odds stacked against them, Tomas rides on Matteo's back through the thick snow, relying on his faithful friend's instincts to guide them. After hours of searching in the merciless cold, they find the foal trapped and weak. What follows is a profound moment of sacrifice and compassion, as Matteo, despite his own age and physical limitations, offers his body as support to the weakened foal. Together they embark on the slow, arduous journey back to the farm, with Matteo demonstrating unwavering perseverance and strength of spirit. Upon their return, the foal is saved, and Tomas is filled with deep gratitude for Matteo's bravery and loyalty. The storm becomes more than a physical challenge. It solidifies the lessons of hope, loyalty, and sacrifice that Tomas and Matteo have embodied throughout their time together. Their bond, which transcends words, inspires everyone on the farm. Don Alvaro publicly acknowledges their courage, noting that their true strength lies not in physical power, but in their capacity to care for others in times of need. As the seasons change and the farm blossoms into spring, Tomas reflects on his experiences. He realizes that, like Matteo, his purpose is to offer second chances to both animals and people. He is determined to make the farm a sanctuary where no one feels abandoned or alone, continuing the legacy of compassion that Matteo taught him. In the twilight of Matteo's life, Tomas sits by his side, expressing gratitude for all the donkey has given him, lessons of love, resilience, and the power to start anew. As Matteo peacefully passes away, surrounded by the love of Tomas and the community he helped build, his story transforms into a legend. Matteo's legacy lives on, not for his physical feats, but for the way he touched the lives of those around him, showing that true greatness comes from what you give to others. If you liked the video, leave a comment. Not sure what to say? Just write "finished" so I know you watched until the end. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now and join us. Thank you for your attention. See you next time.